How do we receive knowledge? I will summarise for you what I retained or responded to from the 3 random links I was sent. This is how knowledge is disseminated. The fact that we have libraries at our fingertips is great, but it doesn't mean we will ever have the time to read all the books. So it is only through inference that we gain knowledge and form opinion. Just as history is written by those who are dominant, knowledge too follows similar rules of hegemony and, like history, is often very subjective. I wish to highlight the importance of the specified randomness within the Waves of Direction project as a means to demonstrate the subjective nature of knowledge, which is increasingly enacted through the means in which it moves. Viewing knowledge, or logos, as a thing that is essentially owned and traded just as it is emitted and disseminated, sees knowledge as existing as a component of systems of biopower. Foucault, riffing off Nietzsche's will to power, wrote will to knowledge, inferring in the title alone the old-known phrase that knowledge is power. Biopower is the term that we learn from Foucault in this book, as a total practice often employed by nation-states upon subjects. Biopower is a holistic approach to control. To give an example of how humans are important actors in this, instead of imagining a dictator, imagine many people cultivating or being cultivated into deeming what is ethical or what operates in the realms of good taste to be visible. In art, taste is biopower, just as we might say that opinion is in knowledge. Biopower is phenomenological, as essentially it just is, and it is implicit. Knowledge is not an isolated form. It is one of the many objects and subjects within biopowerful formations. Now we can begin to visualize the constellation of knowledge and formations of perception as two made up of an architecture of phenomena. In one of the links I was sent, Laurie Anderson points out, well, alludes to, and perhaps unwittingly so, that individuals are now shaped as moments of phenomena. This is where we begin to understand biopower better, not only seeing it simply in terms of structural hierarchies, but as Foucault intended, as all things interconnected and informing and reinforcing power and control. In other words, we, as individuals and social groups, are agents and vessels of biopower. People as phenomena. This image that Anderson creates in her uplifting graduation speech to students of the individual, the artist as phenom, is an image of an identity flitting through abstract space, because it separates one utterance from the entire landscape of biopower. This image at once both denies and demands responsibility from each individual. An individual as phenomenological is in some ways a thing through which culture manifests. Yet an individual as an agent of culture is a thing which has an effect. So a person's level of responsibility and accountability for what it does or doesn't transmit is too, of course, subjective. One could say that people are one node in a greater biopowerful system. Or we could think through Anderson's statements a bit further and think about the imminent possibilities for these nodes in particular, as we are nodes of cognition and consciousness, which is exactly why knowledge is very much too in a balancing act of being both agent and vessel. And this is how biopower works, everything intrinsically interlinked. And specifically, as is our focus here, humans and knowledge are embroiled in systems of cause and effect to either reinforce or change hierarchies. Knowledge created by whom, for whom, what knowledge we actually end up receiving, how we then act as individuals, as agents, what becomes status quo. So, with all this potential and all this importance placed on our action in response to and as arbiters of knowledge, be it conscious or subconscious, How are we as a multitude of phenomena constructed? What is the casing for our phenomenological idea of the self? Jessie Darling knows a lot. And she knows about this casing. She knows of the phenomena of self, not just by living or performing herself, but also through her gaze onto the structural ground which ourselves are bred from. In her most recent text, Precarious Architectures and the Slippage of the Phallic Modern, she writes, We bear it as if it's something that... We bear it as though it's something we could live on in the event of total collapse, but mostly there's no collapse, only seepage, and you can't live on love alone, which is just another form of logos and subject to the incontravenable conditions that make all things precarious. But hey, we tell each other, at least you're working. Feminine architectures include burning corpses, the hole in the ozone layer, the rigid thighs of Madonna Ciccone in 2009, as evenly spaced as the Twin Towers, never to collapse into decrepitude or to expand into an attitude of opened up akimbo. The subject of phallic modernity, the subject at hand, is defined by the fact that he will not be penetrated. Holes are where the seepage starts. What I'm telling you, but I've got two fingers, say down with the subject of phallic modernity, and they're going right up your precarious trajectory. End quote. And how is right now seeping? What is my phallic modern phenomenological monument? The mouth. The close-ups, Sania Ivecovic's face, putting on makeup, stored on video, in pastels, and physically looking like a pale blog's cut-out body parts. The YouTube link to the pronunciation of English words is the post-production of imperial conceptions of knowledge. The mouth, the organ, telling us. Close-up of a woman's mouth, edited parts. We know that knowledge is pancreatic, emitted, seeped through orifices into a hierarchy of validity, truth, importance, and understanding. This filing of knowledge and its acceptability or not is a biopowerful process. It's a process of institutional structuring of culture and more worldwide. When we imagine the modern phallic subject of seeping orifices, we imagine how it looks, what it says, the quota which it fulfills, but perhaps less we imagine what this represents, outside of simply the structure which it both disseminates and upholds, simultaneously casting aspersions and breaks within it. Representations of the modern phallic subject as seeping orifice is our contemporary sublime. Movable neoliberal subject, liquid capital. To quote Theresa Senft, the feeling of the sublime, writes Kant, is at once a feeling of displeasure arising from the inadequacy of the imagination and a simultaneously awakened pleasure. Kant might call this state of a bodiless body an experience of the dynamic sublime. For Kant, there are two ways to think of the sublime, as magnitude, which he associated with mathematics, and as dominion, which he associated with dynamics as described by Newton. End quote. Invent your job. The perfect neoliberalized, dematerialized subject, unaware that creation is privilege. Laurie Anderson tells you, you are a phenom. Don't work to make rent. Create. Perhaps rather than comment on this as short-sighted pure privilege, because we all know in ourselves that however precarious our lives may be, however little in our bank accounts, privilege is to work without needing a job. We might instead think of how this seepage, how this phenomenological mode of culture and knowledge creation is aligned to middle-class versions of black market economies or trading systems, clothes swaps, locally brewed beer, a self-organised art gallery. So, Laurie Anderson continues, tells us to be a jack of all trades, whilst whilst at the same time critiquing business speak, it seems. This is the foolproof performance. You can be as liquid and liberal, and it's about freedom of expression. Yet don't be a square and talk about the self-employment, your image as brand, body of the precariat. Stick to the cutouts, the aura of the orifice, speaker of knowledge and lubrication of subject. Just do it, advice for graduates. Apparently, Einstein rejected some of his best theories as they were not beautiful. So what is our version of beauty? Is this contemporary sublime the beauty we aspire to? Laurie told me that we see symmetry as beauty in the West, and apparently this is laughed at in Japan. In my phonetics lesson on YouTube, the Japanese modern phallic subject has a symmetrically beautiful mouth. Why symmetry, Laurie? She says it's due to the fact that it mimics the almost symmetrical human form. The terraforming of Mars is a 10,000-year project by NASA. The human timeline, i.e. how long Homo sapiens have been around for, is 200,000 years. This is a modernly phallic project for secular society, replacing heaven with life on Mars. Artists in residence everywhere is the terraforming of the post-industrial West. Creators have a unique perspective or opportunity to present perspective. As all persons have a unique perspective, I don't live in your body, but unique perspective communicated is all based on the biopower of knowledge, the right conditions for culturing opinion. Notions of freedom, the modern phallic freedom. Freedom is a cultured, created, curated idea. It is an idea that we think of as our ancestry. Anderson says that doing art is to have that phenomenological moment of being totally free. Yet really, total freedom would be total individualism, which biopowerful structures, although hierarchical, still couldn't allow, as there are too many woven strands dependent on each other. Put the pillow speaker in your mouth, the modern phallic orifice, the lexicon of identity building and precarity coasting. A botany of desire, a hierarchy of meaning. How has this biopowerful subjecthood been cultivated? How can it be changed? Neoteny is the retention of our childlike characteristics. It helps a lot these days, aiding our image of the precariat. According to Jason Godesky, neoteny is in fact abject submission. Every conception of society's ailments always falls back to power. I choose to deviate from Jason, appropriate the term rewilding, and ask how biopower can shift or be challenged. If logos is a tool of biopower and domestication, could a rewilding of thought be not that which is educated, but rather trusted? The end.